How's it going, everyone? Tim here, TRD Adventures. Hope everyone's all well out there. As always, thanks for tuning in. Much appreciated. Well, I hope everyone's having a great start to 2023, or as I like to call it, the year of the rectangle. And speaking of rectangle, meaning to get the ball rolling more on some more specific class 1, 2, and 3 videos and how they coincide with the new 2023 rules. Again, SORRCA new rules came out, lots of changes. So lots of new words, lots of pages, pictures, the whole nine. A lot of people are confused. A lot of people are getting the hang of it, but some people still, just would like it kind of explained a little bit more, or more so, more examples, I guess would be a good way to put it. So again, like all my SORRCA videos right now, disclaimer, the new SORRCA rules are a living rule set. They can change periodically throughout the year or whenever, so they can change. So if you're watching this video later on and etc., stuff like that, make sure you have the most current rules ahead of you and are following along when you're building your truck. Again, just for importance, make sure whenever you're building your watches, make sure you have the most current rules available. Otherwise, you could very well be building out of spec and not even know it. And again, in the description below, I will have a link to both the SORRCA page and the OneDrive files for the SORRCA rules, as well as the rectangle diagrams. With all the stuff that's carried over, all the new changes that are coming, and we'll touch base on just about everything. We're going to go through a full breakdown here. When it's all said and done, paying attention to each rectangle, yes, make sure everything's good. But when it comes down to it, what you're looking for, body-wise, what you're looking at is making sure your body from bumper to bumper is at least as wide as the inside track width, and that's top tire bulge to top tire bulge. That's it. As wide as to be at least as wide as that inside track width all the way through. That's all. It only has to be that wide. You're going to make sure that body is as long as the leading edge of the front tire and the trailing edge of the rear tire. It just has to meet those edges. It doesn't have to go past, it just has to meet those edges. Also in the body, you're going to make sure wherever your center is, when we talk about the center section later, you're going to make sure this section, when it's down on the ground at full compression, is not taller than the top of the wheel rim. Then we make sure our shock hoops are covered. Then as far as bumpers, we're going to make sure the bumpers are at least as wide as the inside track width of our vehicle, front and rear, and they're below the tops of the tires, and the bumpers extend lengthwise past the tire edges, both the front tire edge and the rear tire edge. And other than everything else, truly breaking it down, all the marks, the shapes, tape lines we'll see in a minute, those are really the only few things we're going to look at. So let's break it down. So let's go ahead and take a little deeper dive into Class 1. Now in this, I am specifically going to be with the Class 1 section. In the beginning of the rules, there is a general vehicle guideline section. Again, I recommend going through all that because there are rules that do pertain through all 3 classes. So for example, just make sure you read through that. You don't want to be putting on like a illegal tire or something like that, or a specific illegal mod, wheel size, etc. So give that a go, and let's start looking at this. Talk about things that are just standard, some things that haven't really changed, and then into more of the infamous rectangles and the measurements you really need to pay attention to. So this is really going to help whether you have your current Class 1 or debated it, tossed away. Go ahead, go grab your Class 1 out of the dumpster. I know that's where a lot of them are. Go ahead and go grab it. Put it back on your truck. Let's watch the video. Because honestly, unless you were already building in the very gray area prior, there is a very good chance, a very high % chance, that you're only going to have to check and adjust a few things and take your current Class 1 legal from 2022 into 2023. Or if you are just building a whole new Class 1 truck, going through all this can give you an eye on what to look for and any new body ideas and stuff like that. For starters, yes, there are a lot of pages on here, but a lot of stuff did follow through from the previous rule sections, so they just got a little more defined a little bit better. So first off, Class 1, gates are still 11-inch minimum. So they can be wider, but they have to at least be 11. So always mind your width when you're choosing your axles and wheel offsets, stuff like that. And track width is actually even more important now than it was before, in my opinion. First off, Class 1, no rear steer, no dig, no selectable overdrive, like your twin VFD transmissions. Those are not allowed in Class 1. If for whatever reason your Class 1 has one or both of those, they have to be mechanically locked out to compete, not just turned off. They have to be mechanically locked out. Next year, Class 1 still has a maximum tire diameter of 4.19 inches. Front and rear bumpers are still required in Class 1. A windshield is still required in Class 1. Windshield's also got a little more of a further definition. So if you are building something custom or looking to do some cage work, definitely need to take a look at that windshield section. Next here, cab only is not allowed in Class 1. Tube beds and flatbeds are allowed, and they have their own section in here on requirements they must meet, and again, they must also fill the rectangle. Next here, moving on down into the chassis. So chassis took a few changes. One, there is no longer a material restriction on chassis. So before it was just you had to have a metal chassis for class 1. Now that's open. So now you can still run metal, you can run carbon fiber, you can run G10, you can run other materials now. So that opens up class 1 quite a bit right off the bat. Next part that opens it up, no shock hoop requirements. So you don't even need shock hoops like you had to have previously in class 1. And if you do have shock hoops, there's no restriction. You can affix them to the chassis however you see fit. And lastly here on the chassis, a flat skid is still required. Class 1 still requires a chassis mounted servo. And next here, another big change for class 1, no tire coverage. There's no longer tire coverage required in class 1. And we'll touch base on that when we start messing with some of the other rectangles. So again, that opens up class 1 quite a bit. Definitely opens up more body choices because there were certain bodies out there that were just narrow by nature and took some extensive work to meet that tire coverage rule. Now you have a lot more leeway. You're no longer stressed about a millimeter here or a millimeter there. So I like that rule change quite a bit. Next big little added here into class 1. Class 1 previously did not have a minimum cab height. It does now. So the minimum cab height is 4.5 inches, and we'll touch a little bit more on that as we go along. Here, start talking about some overall body requirements. So body requirements. Previously, as it was before, your body needs to be aligned with your wheelbase. Wheel nut to wheel nut needs to be aligned in the wheel wells. You have 1/2 inch of leeway, front and rear combined. So for example, if your rear is aligned perfectly, you have 1/2 inch in the front that you can either push the axle forward or pull the axle backwards. Or if you want to push the front 1/4 inch out and then push the rear 1/4 inch out, that's fine. 1/4 and 1/4 is a half. You can't do 1/2 inch front, 1/2 inch rear. Not cool. So check. Next, your body, which will consist of the overall rectangle, must extend to the tire's edges, front, rear. The body must extend to, or equal to the leading edge of the front tire and the trailing edge of the rear tire. So that is how long your body has to be when it's all mounted and aligned with your wheel wells. Next year, the big change that probably took out 90% of the vehicles that were running class 1 competitively. No chassis or suspension can be visible when penetrating through the body. So I, like most previously, my shock towers just simply came through the bed. Cut holes in the bed, shock towers through, called it a day. That's no longer a thing. You have to cover the shock towers when they come through the bed. And a lot of people kind of freaked out about that, but it's a really easy fix. You can simply cover them up with some scale accessories. You could make a fuel cell. You could make a bed box or like a toolbox and cover the shock towers. Or the simplest is making a tonneau cover for your bed. And that is a win-win because I have been looking for this question to be asked on the SORRCA page, and it finally was. The big debate here was because down in the rules, to gain drop bed points, the drop bed must be complete with no protrusions. Well, even if you cover up the shock towers, technically there are still protrusions. But it has been answered. As long as the shock towers are covered, you can still gain scale points for the drop bed and pass for covering up your shock towers. The tonneau cover works and applies for both. Just having a tonneau cover over it, and then say it's like the very back, you have it velcroed down. So the tonneau cover by itself covers the towers so they're not visible on the course. And then at the tech table, the tech or judge can undo the velcro, roll the tonneau cover back. That your bed does meet drop bed requirements, and then it simply close back up, you gain your drop bed points, and you're legal because you're covering your shock towers. Win-win. The next part here in the body that isn't specifically mentioned in the class 1 section, but it is mentioned in the scale points down in the hard body section. So hard body now, previously it was 12 points. It's still 12 points, but previously you had to have a full hard body to gain all 12 points. Now it is broke down into front, center, and rear rectangle. So you can gain 4 points for each section. So you could hard body front, hard body center, no hard body rear, or vice versa, in some form of that combination. So in order to gain hard bodies, the body in each section must fill the rectangle when viewed from above. Bodies with inset grills or other oddities where the body does not fill the rectangle between the fenders can be covered by the bumper, winch plate, or vanity plate to fill the void. So in order to gain hard body points, when you look down at your truck from above, each of the little shaded areas, your body must meet and fill all of that from bumper to bumper. Must be filled by body. There can't be any gaps, and that's what's referring to with bodies with inset grills or oddities. Examples, Jeeps or the Tamiya F350. Because of the way that aggressive curve is in the front, there's a gap between the front of the grill or the bulge area and say the fenders or the headlights. So You will have to have some work and a little curvy maybe to meet that spec and make sure there's no gap there, fill the rectangle, and gain your points. So that right there is your basic major changes and things that stayed the same, and then a little bit into the body. So from that point, we're good to go ahead and get a body mounted up. I suggest go ahead and taking front bumpers, rear bumpers off. Have your bumpers off. Get your body mounted in the position that you prefer. Make sure you're within your wheelbase alignments. You have your 1/2 inch leeway. Go ahead and get your holes cut in the bed for the shock towers to come through. We'll worry about that later on. Or you're getting everything fit. When measurements stuff are taken, like heights and stuff like that, these measurements are all taken at full compression. So give your truck a nice little shake, put it down, and just push down your truck till the suspension stops. Don't squish it down, just till the suspension stops, because then that is full compression. So your body's on, your wheel wells are aligned, and your body at least goes to the edge of the front tire and the edge of the rear tire. One thing you need to look at full compression is look in the general center section of your vehicle. We don't have to fully measure it out yet, but go ahead and get a general idea of where the center of your vehicle is. If it's a truck, it's going to be basically the cab area of the truck. Make sure the bottom edge of your body, or slider if you have them, is no taller than the top of the wheel rim. So at full compression check, go ahead and make sure this is at least equal to or below the top of the wheel rim. It cannot be above it. And we'll circle back to that. Body's on, wheel wells are aligned, it extends to the tires, and the center section is equal to or lower than the wheel rim. So from there, we're going to be talking about the overall rectangle, which is broken down into 3 sections: the front rectangle, the center rectangle, and the rear rectangle. Like I mentioned, measurements for this stuff is going to be taken at full compression. Next up is track width, which I mentioned earlier, and how important track width is now. Track width before was important because you had to pay attention, either narrow it up or widen it out to, meet your tire coverages and stuff like that. Track width also now determines how wide your body has to be and how wide your bumpers have to be. Previously, bumpers were based off your windshield of your vehicle. It's no longer a thing. Bumpers are based off track width now, and body width is also based on track width. Wherever your body, and I say body, but I'm kind of referring to overall rectangles, front, center, and rear, they have to be at least as wide as your track width all the way through. So for example, if your track width is 6 inches and track width is taken top tire bulge to top tire bulge. So if that measurement, for example, is 6 inches, your body, front, center, and rear have to be 6 inches wide all the way through. So that covers that. And that will also be how wide your bumpers are. And we'll talk about bumpers in just a minute. So we're good there. And honestly, most bodies, even if you don't have to worry about the tire coverage, most bodies are at least going to be wider than your track width or equal to the common axle setups and offsets and stuff like that. Now, that does open up a little bit for some leeway for some custom bodies or body modifications, because that was also one thing I did forget to mention. There is no wording or limit on major body modifications. Again, that also just opens up class 1 and some more creativity. So no body modifications are necessarily pointed out on here, so take that as you will. That's going to be one of those ones where we're just kind of waiting to see who pushes the limit the furthest, and then what's allowed and what's not, and then kind of go from there. We're at this point now, body's on, we're aligned, everything's good. Our body's at least as wide as our track width, so we're more than good there. We're definitely over. Next, it's time to go ahead and start measuring some things at full compression and check everything out. Now, you don't have to mark everything on the body like I did. Just some tape is work if you're that worried about it or really pushing the line. This is not 100% accurate here. This is mostly just visual representation. So we need to define each section. So we're going to go ahead and define the center section here. So for center section, bottom of the body or slider cannot be higher than the wheel rim at full compression check. We covered that earlier. Length. The center section starts and ends as follows: 1 inch or less from the trailing edge of the front tire, and then 1 inch or less from the leading edge of the rear tire. So your truck's on your bench, you're sitting there at full compression, and then you take a tape measure, micrometer, whatever measuring device you got, and you're going to go from the trailing edge of the front tire, and you're going to measure back 1 inch, and just put your tape line. And you're going to do the same with the rear. From the leading edge of the rear tire, you're going to bring it in 1 inch. You're going to go ahead and put a mark or tape there. You don't have to necessarily do this other line I did, but I did at full compression, put it down, and I took a piece of tape from the top of the rim to the top of the rim and just laid it across the body. So when we look at everything, now we're defined. So from our trailing edge of the front tire, 1 inch in. So right here, this is where my center section starts. And for the rear, leading edge and inch in, right here, this tape line. So this section here, from tape to tape, that is the center section for my vehicle. Now also, center section does not mean cab, it means center section. So this is our defined center section for this body. Then we have the rear section here and the front section here. Then also here again is that tape line I mentioned. So at full compression, this is where the top of my wheels are. So actually I am good. So I do have a little bit of leeway there. So definitely good there. Good. And what it's basically looking for is when you're measuring the center section, is that's where the center section exists. There has to be something there. So it's looking to make sure there's body there. Make sure it's not aggressive trimming. Make sure you have something there, because that was part that confused a lot of people. Is everyone's referred to the center section as the cab, and you're like, well, most bodies, there's clearly more than an inch between the tire and the cab. That's why the center section does not mean cab. It means center section, because your cab can be elsewhere in your vehicle. Unimog, your cab could be up here at the front. Well, if it's up here in the front, you're definitely not going to have an inch or less of gap between that. So that is simply truly defining the center section of the vehicle. Whatever cab configuration or bed or whatever, you make sure for that center section, or that inch in, there's at least body there. That body is there, and at least through the entire length of the center section, from tape line to tape line, there is at least a section that is below the top of the wheel at full compression. And you'll be good there as far as center section. In addition to that, all three sections, front, center, and rear, have a minimum height requirement. All three sections must extend at least ½ inch above the top of the tire, which is very easy to fit, and 99% of the bodies are going to clear it. Custom bodies is where you really have to kind of worry about that. But also, if you're worried about your center section here, like if it is too low, or your body is a shorter body, or you have it mounted up a little taller, the center section can also be met with the use of a slider. If you're worried or looking for more scale points, you could attach sliders. And sliders for the new rules do have to be attached to the chassis. They can't be just bolts to the body how we used to do it all before. They actually have to be attached to the chassis and then come out. And they actually must support the weight of the vehicle. Like if something happens, they can't bow up, they can't flex and give. They actually truly have to support the weight of the vehicle and function as a actual rock slider would. So if you are looking at rock sliders, you're going to really pay attention to those rules along with the center section. Make sure that rock slider is below the top of the wheel and is at least the entire length of the center section. So if you're building sliders, it follows the exact same rule as the center section to count as sliders and gain those points. So we have all of our rectangles laid out, and so thus far everything's good. Our center section exists. We're below the tops of the rims at full compression. Next here, we're going to look at the cab area. A cab is required and must be at least 4.5 inches from the bottom edge of the body or slider to the top of the body or cage work in the section that the cab exists. A 2x3 horizontal section of body or cage work must be at or above the minimum requirement where the cab exists. So, for example, wherever your cab is, and luckily mine's just right here in the middle, you're going to measure from the bottom of the body, bottom edge of the body, or slider if you have them, from here to the top of the roof, not counting roof racks and stuff like that. The actual roof, it has to at least be 4.5 inches tall. Then, in addition, once you're looking at it, wherever you're at in the top, there at least has to be a 2x3 section of roof at the very top that meets that specification. In case you're making a cage and narrowing everything up, it at least has to have a 2x3 area of roof. So 4.5 inches, good, check, and at least have a definite 2x3 area there, and we're good to roll. So that right there, that's the basics of getting the body mounted and making sure everything is good and inspect there. So that right there, you're good. Body's aligned, it's as long as it needs to be, it's more than wide as it needs to be, and your rectangles and everything do exist. That's the thing, a lot of people are really worrying about the rectangles, but it's mostly just defining each section is all it is. Not like, it's nothing super crazy. So the last big change here are bumpers. That's why I kind of saved them for last, because we definitely want to make sure we get everything fit and fitted before we start working on bumpers and make sure we're all good. So previously, bumpers had a required minimum, which was based on the windshield. Your front and rear bumpers had to at least be as wide as your windshield. That's no longer the case. Bumper widths are based on your track width now. For bumpers, must have material as wide as the inside front track width below the tops of the tires. Vertical height of the bumper material must be at least 3.2 millimeters. Specified requirement must be beyond the body and tires lengthwise. And for both front and rear bumper, any portion that is above the top of the tire or behind the body, chassis or leading edge of the front tire, trailing edge of the rear tire will not count towards the required specification of the bumper. And again, all measurements are taken at full compression. So all of that, what's it mean? Your bumper has to have a section. You can be just a simple bar like this, or you can have an extravagant bumper. Most of us are probably going to choose something nice and simple like this with a little stinger or something. So your bumper needs to just have basically a section like this. It has to be at least as wide as the inside track width, has at least be 1/8 inch thick or tall, and that section has to be below the tops of the tires, front and rear, and then they must extend past the body, front and rear. Just like that, it's pretty simple. Again, you don't have to do anything crazy with bumpers. So what that's meaning is, say like right here, it's as wide, but say like right here, I started bending the bumper backwards and then it was past the body or touching or past the edge of the tire, then it's a no-go. I have to have at least this section, this much section for my truck, as wide as the track width, below the tops of the tires, and in front of the tires. And simply, the easiest check on that is getting your bumpers on and just putting your truck into a wall. Nice and slow, not crazy and uncontrolled, just push it to the wall. Make sure your bumpers front and rear hit before anything else. You know, they can hit just shy of the tires, but the bumper has to hit first. They have to be past. Like I said, the bumper's nothing crazy here. Team Garage Hack modular bumper on there and just a simple little homemade rear bumper. Everything's all good. I've met the track width requirement. I'm below the tops of the tires and I'm past the bodies and we're good. Check, check, check. And that right there is the gist of Class 1. So again, we've pulled our old Class 1s out of the trash can. We've looked at the pictures, we've read through the rules, we've made a few measurements, and we look at our Class 1. The only two things I would have had to change on my 2022 Class 1 was put a tonneau cover on the bed and adjust my front bumper down, and I would have been perfectly legal headed into 2023. And that is probably all that most of us would have had to change going into the new rules. All the shapes, the rectangles, the measurements, and all that stuff. High percentage of the competing Class 1 field were already there, minus shock hoops and some bumpers. So we had some crazy front bumpers and we had giant holes in our bed. Is what it was in 2022. It's 2023 now, so the rectangle is the lull. Again, that's just something simple. A couple bumper adjustments, or even if you wanted to, make some bumpers, it's pretty simple and pretty cheap to get a couple bumpers just made up, brazed or welded. Nothing too crazy. So I hope walking through this at least has helped some people out there, or if you were just totally lost, I hope it helped put you on the right track. And as far as I'm reading things and how I've seen things answered, we should be on track based on the current version of the rule set that we have working with here today. A lot of stuff, again, carried over from 2022. It just got more definitions and bullets put under it, and all the font got bigger. And we've added some pictures. That's changed. It's not anything super crazy. I said between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages of rules, 3 pages of pictures, plus the general guideline section. All those pages, 2 things is all I would have had to change, and been perfectly fine for 2022. Now, I'm very happy with a lot of the rule changes, the chassis material, the tire coverage rules, stuff like that. I'm very happy because it opens up Class 1. It really opens up the creativity part of it, in my opinion, too, because there were a lot of bodies that I really wanted to run, but it was like, man, I don't feel like putting the work into making sure everything covers the tires and stuff like that. Your body options are now expanded, your chassis materials are expanded, so you can get other chassis out there, and the chassis are coming down the line with the new Class 1 rules. Brazen, Grubb Carmworks, GK, and I'm sure there's a few others already on the way, but they're already having carbon fiber or G10 chassis out ready to rock and roll. So the market is there and they're in line with the new rules and stuff like that. So at that point, we're ready to rock and roll and finish up some building. Again, I hope this video was at least helpful in some way or another. If you did like the video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Any questions, comments, anything like that, as always, put them down below. Do my best to get everything answered, or if there was any errors or anything that we see later on down the road, I can do my best to at least update maybe the description, or when we do like revised update videos, we'll tackle that stuff down the road. So that's going to wrap it up currently for the Class 1 video. Now we started on our Class 2 and 3 builds. Again, thank you for tuning in. As always, much appreciated. So until the next rectangle, everyone have a great one. Crawl on.